I'm smiling underneath my mask because it is such a joy to feel church. Thank you for all of you who have tried to feel your way into that felt sense of church across this time and space. For all of the ways, because you sent me your stories and how you're trying to manage so many things as parents and employees and the many hats that you wear, but the ways that you have tried to hold yourself and children close to that sense of the holy, sense of what really matters, even as I think both trouble and the clarification that comes from trouble reveals to us. It's really good to be in the company of church. This is a reading that I have been sharing in a couple of other circles. I wanted to mostly bring it to you all. It's entitled Talking to My Son or Daughter or Child, if you will, Before Sleep, Rosemary Watola Tromer. Which is bigger, he asks me, the ocean or sky? And I want to tell him the heart, which even today has been practicing vastness, is learning to say yes in new languages, learning to stretch beyond the center, beyond the lips, learning to be more moon and less woman, to reflect light without owning it, learning to lose whatever it has used before as a measure. This is the way I want to love. In an idiom stronger than tongues, I want to love in the way that tides pull and release, like the moon which holds without touch. I want to invite the sky to create a bigger space in me, a place spacious enough to hold all the wings of the passing moment. I want to be buoyant enough to carry all of love's weight. The sky, I say, the sky is bigger, but the ocean is also wide. He's satisfied by my words, closes his eyes, and in my chest a star falls. In my belly, strong tug of tides. As I listen to the door buzz, there may be others who are joining in, and thank you for stretching our ovals. If there are new members of the church and we haven't had a chance to meet, I'm Katie Hong, the Minister of Faith Formation, and Michelle is there. Video recording this because there are a number of families who could not meet the 3 enrollment schedule, so we're hoping to send this video out so that at least we respond to some of the major updates and sort of the collective questions and answers that we'll record. As you came in, I hope that you were able to give us your legible email addresses. We will use that to send out an invitation to complete an online enrollment form. Those of you who have been doing this for years, you understand the process. We will download all of that information, and then Michelle is our principal staff. She will organize all of that. And as we head toward September 12th, the Merging of Waters, which has been the annual sort of regathering of the church and starting of the church year. But before that, we'll send out information so that your children and your roles as teachers, you'll have that information so you know where to go. Today, because it's not about that online form, today I wanted us to gather together to have some time for conversation. For me, staff, as constant changes are happening, to give us some updates about what we're anticipating and what we're asking of our families to do. and then what other questions that you have. So that's our time together. Before we step into that though, what I want to ask us to do is to turn to a neighbor, 2s or 3s are fine, and here are the 2 questions that I want to give us about 5 minutes. First question, what has been your experience of church this past year? What has been your experience of church? And you maybe want to adapt the definition of church. Maybe it might have been rituals at home. But however you understand this sacred ministry that we share, what has that been this past year for you and your family? And then the second question comes out of that. As the church envisions opening for in-person gathering with Merging of Waters, what are your expectations? What are specific hopes for religious education in particular? Or if you would like to be more broad, what are your expectations, hopes, as church regathers again in person this coming? Clear about the 2 questions? Mm-hmm. Okay. So turn to your neighbor, take about 5 minutes to respond to those questions. Those of you who have been connected online to live stream, you're able to see in the pews our choir members and the music ministry in particular. But it's been wonderful as staff to have at least some people there that we can actually engage with rather than the blip of a red light on the screen. But with that are also, I'm so embarrassed that I wasn't able to stay with Churchill the past year. I did my best, but it was really, really difficult. I think part of sharing our narratives and stories is a way of finding our way back again. And then we are more or less, I think, in the same zip code. How we have each struggled with the challenges. I'd like to give some time for us to do that as well. If you are willing, just staying with the first question, what has been the experience of church? How have you as a family held on to or brought attention to the holy, to the sacred, and the spiritual dimension? What has that experience been like over this past year? No guilt, no embarrassment. We have all wrestled.
So I'm Tara. I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and we've been coming to Unity since they were little. And they were terrible. They did not engage with their classes. I would log them in, but they would turn their cameras off like as soon as I stepped away. And then I was teaching, so I couldn't, I couldn't monitor them. But I think just the fact that Unity was there, and we talked about getting the emails of like the video clips that you would send KP and some of the other staff, and how those little snippets, like those moments of ministry really helped us, because it was such a dark time. So many of us were struggling in all aspects of our lives and just like needed church, but then not being able to come. So thank you for that. And then just looking forward to getting back, whatever back means, but just getting connected again.
Thanks. Other voices, other stories.
Well, my wife and I, we kind of disconnected for a year, but we did make sure that our son was on. RE on time. He's there 15 minutes early, like he was supposed to. But my wife and I, we really kind of checked out. We used that time to just, have quiet time. But we did for my mom. We got her the internet, we got her an iPad, we got Zoom, and we showed her how to do it. Because for my mom, it was really important still to stay connected. So we did that for her so she could every Sunday morning be part of the service. So, but we're looking forward to coming back as well. I think it's an important community to be part of. But, so yeah.
A couple of other voices? Yes.
So my work prior to the shutdown was online and remote. So like all of a sudden it just felt like everything was online and remote, and I just got super overwhelmed. So we kind of just like cut our losses that weren't school or work. There we were involved with at first, and then we did the family covenant, which really, I think, helped ground us. And one of our things was to be outside more, and that has been our church like, for the last years, to be outside as much as possible. So, yeah. And I'm looking forward to, coming back. It's mostly just being my daughter that comes. So that's, and she's really excited to be in the choir, so she's going to do this year.
Thanks, Heather. Anyone else? Yes.
I'll just say that we stayed connected somewhat through our older son being in COA. We were talking a little bit in our group about how that group really managed to do it, which was pretty special. But in general, in terms of feeling what church is, particularly for me, I think I felt that in how much togetherness we had as a family, and we kind of let that be enough, and tried to, I tried to just focus on the benefits of that. I think the lack of having other things to be going to, and the schedules, and there was that silver lining, so to speak, in the midst of also so much besides COVID, all of the racial unrest, and just so much that was happening in the world, taking time as a family to just talk about it and to just be with big feelings. And sometimes I think we don't make enough time to do that because we got to get here and there and everywhere. And so we tried to turn that around a little bit.
As a staff, go ahead.
I was going to say, we actually did do church pretty much every Sunday. For us, it became almost more intimate feeling of church that way, because we were doing it around like the brunch table and all making breakfast, and instead of, going to classes midway through the service, my daughter was there for all of it, for the sermons and that, so it became a large part of how we discussed all of the racial and other turmoil going on this summer, and how we felt it. And it's the first time, since teaching junior highs a lot, it's the first time I've gotten to go to a liturgical meal the whole year in service in my life. So it was almost, there's certainly physical disconnection, but in some ways there was more connection.
Thank you. As you may imagine, on the staff end, we've been having similar conversations, and we are continuing to have this conversation. Liturgically, many of you may have some recognition around this phrase: the building is closed, the church is not. Right? And for a generation of us, if I can generalize, and in the popular culture, the way in which our faith identity is site-specific. It is related to a holy sacred space. It is about making a pilgrimage, if you will, to a certain site, to a certain community. There is touch. There's recognition. This is holy space. When the building is no longer accessible, and yet the claim that the church is open, that the church has never stopped being open. As staff, we have, and we continue to have, I think, really defining and compelling conversations about what does that theologically mean? What does that mean? Because one of the things that a faith community does, what our children are learning to do, is to use language to name something as real that a wider society may not even know is real, or may actually oppose and say that is not real. Just as our racial justice work in language allows us to name something as real that arguably, strongly arguably, has remained hidden and invisible. Right? So the theological work over this past year of what then is church? What does church mean for us? Has been a really lively conversation. As staff, we talked about technology. We talked about the way that IQCAT and many others, it granted a sense of connection. And then the conversation became even more nuanced. How is that connection landing for people for whom that connection is within the frame and the context of a historical relationship that has been put on pause, versus those who never went to church and their one and only or first and only experience of church is online? How does that word connection land similarly or differently given different demographics? It was a fascinating question. Many people on staff, as well as you, are familiar with Zoom fatigue, that even when I try to look at the camera to make eye contact, it means that by doing eye contact, I'm actually not making eye contact because of the distance of the camera. Or the way that our minds become tired because we are constantly laboring to filter out distractions. Namely, how do I look like in my Zoom box? I learned that very early on. I've been looking around and coming back to my words and my facial expression. But the Zoom fatigue that we talked about. And then in the youth ministry, fascinating conversations about performativity. How are we presenting ourselves for adolescents and teenagers who are already on social media, heightened in their concern and sensitivity about that? What is performativity? And you can imagine the kinds of conversations about what is worship, because it really feels like it's a performance in front of cameras to a global audience, because it really was a global audience. We got emails from people from parts of the world that we normally didn't know that we were connecting with. We had conversations about anonymity. What does it mean that on a Zoom box you can mute yourself, you can kind of remove your video? What does that do to a quality of availability? I feel like you are available because you can't just get up and run out the door. And even in conversation, I can tell by your embodied presence. Different cultures give maybe different proportions to it, but I think all of us would agree that we communicate non-verbally. We signal to one another whether we can go deeper into vulnerability around the difficult topic of conversation or not, whether it's worth the investment or not. We had all sorts of conversation about what does it mean when church is mediated through technology? What are the gifts and the blessings? And then what are the deficits? And then even more, how is this socializing us when Ari talks about ministry as always relational ministry? How do these tools mediate and socialize us into a kind of relationship that we are aspiring to, or we absolutely need to be critical of, and everything in between? So many conversations this past year from a staff point of view about what is church when we're online. I want to segue into the next part of the question. How have your experiences informed your expectations, your hopes and aspirations, as we still anticipate opening in person, starting with merging of waters? What are the hopes and expectations you bring? To church generally, or to Ari more in specific? What did you hear? What did you discuss?
So we talked about making connections, just with everything going on in our lives, that church is this place for us that's like calmness and just, I don't know, we felt untethered, right? And so I feel like it's one of those tethers that feels like it grounds you and your family and your parenting. And we talked about, we don't know what that looks like, right? With work, with school, with home, with our vaccinations coming for the younger kids. So just a lot of uncertainty, and then just trying to focus on, is it going to be connecting over video again? Is it going to be in person? Trying to be flexible.
Lots of flexibility. Other hopes, expectations? Yes?
I'll share a quick story of what happened I guess it was last spring when our 18-year-old son was graduating from Central High School. Some of the kids at the last minute, because school was doing it and things were opening up, and they felt like they could do a graduation party. He and some of his friends that were in RE and had been going to Tower Club and went through the whole, his whole from 5th grade, or from 5 years old up to 18 years old through with Unity, and were friends with them. They came here to school, or to church, to do pictures along with 20 other kids, and there was probably 5 or 6 kids from Unity. They felt like this was a great place to do those pictures for various reasons, and the connection that they developed with each other, and the trust that they had for each other, and their experience of being in Tower Club and being able to be vulnerable and honest with each other is, and really, create that religious experience was so important for them. And I want to give that to my 15-year-old too, my 14-year-old. So that's the hope, is that we'll be able to create those relationships and that experience going forward.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to build on that in just a minute.
I have a thought. So my child makes friends very easily. He has met people that he never knew before through online networks. But what's important to me is that my child have trusted adults in his life. And I mean, it's just our family right now. So he's at an age primed and ready to really create those relationships with adults where if he can't say something to me, he can go to them. And I feel like, to your point about being able to mute yourself or turn your camera off, I think it's easy for him to make friends with kids. It's less easy for him online to make friends with adults. And I'm really looking forward to reestablishing that work through RE and other programs.
Yes.
So one of the things that I need a little bit of information on, or at least I do, is just Jan and Rob not being there next year, like how that's going to change the traditions that we might have. Our family's been here for our Earth-based practices, so I'm already concerned that a lot of that stuff's going to go away. Like there's also celebrations, we didn't do anything online with that this year. So like those kinds of things, like maybe figuring out a way that we can continue to do that as a family, maybe invite other families in. So, yeah.
I'll just speak briefly to that, and I'll return later on to speak a little bit more. If it's news to anyone who has not been part of Unity, for 21 years, Jan and Rob Eller Isaacs were the co-senior ministers. They were to have retired after 20 years, and then the pandemic struck, and so they extended their tenure for last year, additional year, and then they really needed to retire. And so the interim senior minister, Kathy Hurd, has already started in her work. Kathy will be more present, starting merging of waters in September, going forward, in terms of in the pulpit, in the chancel, engaging with the congregation. But has already started the interim work, and in this 1 year interim, that's the aspiration, that we will contain it to 1 year, and we will be entertaining these questions about what is permanent, meaning what of the last 21 years of ministry, worship, liturgy, programs, education, staffing, what has been institutionalized, and irrespective of senior leadership, they're part of Unity Church, they're our ministry. And what is transient? What were those unique particular charisms or gifts or ministry styles and programs that really are specific to the leadership? And so they go with Jan and Ron, right? Those questions have been asked repeatedly at multiple levels. And certainly the board is continuing with the executive team and Kathy Hurt in looking at that question. For those of you who have been tracking the live stream worship services, if you know the rituals, you know that they're already sort of being tweaked. There's some flexibility built into that. So anticipate that change, but you're going to be invited into shaping that change. So the ministerial search team has started their work. They are going to call together cottage conversations, focus groups, World Cafe style gatherings. And selfishly, for us, we have representation on the ministerial search team of members of the church who know religious education intimately. People like Betsy Hearn and Morgan France, who are on the religious education ministry, also are on the MST. So that may be more information, but you were prompting us about what are we looking at this kind of transition interim year. It will be an ongoing process with an invitation for all of us to give our voice to it. What else? That may be different from what we already heard. What else did you hear about expectations, hopes, and dreams for this coming year?
You never got to that question, but thinking about it just personally, and maybe taking it something that I haven't said yet. I've learned to not have expectations, to not have goals, because things change so quickly. But I guess the one hope that I would have is that safety comes first, right? I mean, as much as we all want to open up and want to not have things repeated from last year, if that's what we need to do to stay safe, I hope that's not overwhelmed by feelings of wanting to talk.
Thanks for that. And I'll speak a little bit to that in just a couple of minutes about how has Unity Church and its leadership really thought about reopening? What are the sources that we have been referring to over and over again? How is Unity Church relevant to other UU congregations? It should surprise no one here that the more you move global, away from the local situation, it quickly becomes incredibly gray. So it's not to say that we have not been attentive to the wide array of decision making, but we have been trying to pay close attention to what's happening locally. So I'll say more about that. Let me weigh in on that second question as well from a staff perspective. This is really about the ministry with the older youth. Drew came in one day and he wanted to have this conversation because he had been at Central's graduation and Melvin Carter was the keynote. And Melvin Carter, being who he is, he presented something powerful, and Drew called it almost a kind of a call to Jesus moment. With so much that is changing in the world, with so much that is in jeopardy, with so much that is about risk management, that there is no such thing as absolutely safe. So how do we engage with the challenging questions that are no longer simply academic questions? They are real challenges, and in many ways we have already crossed over the threshold. This was sort of the impassioned, emotional reality that Melvin Carter was speaking and engaging with those graduating seniors at Central. And Drew, in his mind and in our conversation, we tried to understand what was the impact. How did the gathered community experience that? We talked about how all of us have gone through those threshold moments, those significant moments in our life when who we are and what matters to us rises from the more trivial and mundane and ordinary. And then in about a day or two or week or month, they sort of quiet back down again. And Drew was really fighting against that because as he observed our Tower Club youth, and this is more than flattery and more than patting our kids or our ministry on the back, it was pretty clear to me in KP, for our youth, this was not just another moment of transition, a life moment that will settle down and will quiet, and then quickly they'll be on to the next big thing. For our youth, Drew was pretty clear. This was a call. This was vocational for them. This was more than just being a graduating high school senior. This was a moment in which what they had been hearing about, both at church, at home, in conversations with family, this is an existential moment for them. And how fraught that word was. In religious education, you've heard me say, faith is something that is caught. It's in the rituals. It's in lighting the chalice and reading a poem. It's in, hi, my name is, in introducing myself. It's in those cultural elements, and ritual life is particularly compelling and culture shaping. That for our youngest, faith is something that is caught. And then when their cognitive abilities kick in, we actually learn, teach Unitarian Universalism. We engage in liberal religious education and what that means. It's caught and it's taught, and then hopefully by the time they go into Tower Club, teenagers, we get buy-in from them. So staying with the rhythm, it's caught, taught, it's bought. And then by the time that they become young adults, they have enough cognitive ability, they have agency, they have this willingness. It becomes something that is sought. And for those of you who know this, that's pretty much where liberal religion, by and large, sort of concludes the process. We leave it up to the coming-of-agers who are now adults on their spiritual journey to go and seek it out on their own. Increasingly, more and more, over the last 15 to 20 years, liberal religious educators have pushed back on that. And they said, when do we notice people coming back into a faith community for themselves, but certainly for their children? When does faith identity that has been largely politicized and importantly called to attention around race, class, gender, sexuality, etc., but even for our Unity Church kids, when does their faith identity, that they're a Unitarian Universalist, right? They go to Unity Church. When does that identity become prominent enough? And does it have the kind of theological proportions from which then they can draw from and actually articulate and actually enter into how they choose to engage with the other pressing agendas of our world? We sort of scratched our head as educators and said, that's a really good question. But there's one thing that we can safely say makes their faith and our faith significant. It's when something happens that makes their faith rot, in the sense of wrought iron, worked iron. When someone goes through a divorce, when they lose a job, when they retire, when someone's in the hospital, themselves or someone that they love, or when they look at the climate crisis, when they reach the edges of what they know and who they are, at those existential markers, the religious educator said, yeah, faith identity becomes important again. It's not without reason that when young adults couple, they get married, they have children, responsibility is felt, let's go to church. My grandparents are dying and something needs to mark that, but I'm not churched. Let's go and talk to a minister about how we can have a memorial service, right? Those liminal moments when faith is wrought, caught, bought, sought, but that faith becomes real when it is wrought. So one of the things as staff we said was, what do we mean when we say the building is closed but the church is not? We need to find a way of supporting our members to engage being church. What does that mean? At the least it means spiritual practice. Weekly spiritual practice, via worship, or daily spiritual practice. we need to somehow offer opportunities to be educated, to be learned, to read, write, converse with one another about rooting ourselves in liberal faith identity, meaning spiritual practice. And so that's what we've been doing over this past year. If you've been looking at the messages, the summer offerings around spiritual practice. And of course, this is absolutely pertinent when it comes to religious education for our children. And so I said to the REMT and to the executive team, you know, this every church during COVID is a story Sunday, and it's wonderful. But I, along with many of you who have actually emailed me, we also miss Children's Chapel. There's something about a dedicated worship service, and we know that it's important to be part of the whole intergenerational worship service as well. So when merging of waters happens and we're back together again, let's stay on top of that, and let's be even more clear and reflect on the structure that we have, which is a combination of mixing and huddling, as professionals call it. Right? We talked about UU Families Initiative and the family covenant rituals, mealtime and bedtime rituals. We've talked about, we've always said that teaching is a spiritual practice, parenting is a spiritual practice. Parents are the spiritual directors of their children. Do parents get that? Have we done enough to underscore that and support them to be spiritual directors of their children? What does that mean? And I remember the moment where several of the REMT people looked at me and I said, it means that we will likely ask more of the parent community who are already so tasked and busy. But we will ask them to step into teacher training, which we are not going to unnecessarily tax their busy lives. But if we're going to step into that and ask for more of their time and commitment, we need to be absolutely clear what we're trying to do, which is about helping you to be spiritual directors of your children. If you haven't heard me with this mantra, everything says that it's about the parents, it's about the significant adults in that 17-year-old's life, whether they will claim faith as a prominent identity or not. So this coming year, myself, the RE staff, but also the religious education ministry team, we're going to really struggle among ourselves, but then invite you into the struggle about how to equip all of us to more consciously step into spiritual practice of directing our children's faith journey. I welcome your creative suggestions and thoughts as we go forth into that. I'm sharing this because, let me make a segue here, talking a little bit about where we were headed for religious education, irrespective of the pandemic. So these were ideas in place and decisions that were formulated even before the pandemic and this past year. Let me state what the obvious, just so that we're on the same page. There is no 4:30 service, and for those of you who love the 4:30 precious jewel that it was, I lament with you. There was something about that service that was really dear and special. But for a variety of reasons that speak about capacity, there is no 4:30 service. So 9 o'clock worship service with 9 o'clock religious education, and then a little bit of overlap, which I'll speak about, 10 o'clock worship service and religious education. And then 11 o'clock, thank you, 11 o'clock. And then, not in the near future, but the hospitality, welcome, other people are thinking about, could we do something creative with food ministries around lunchtime? And then in the afternoon, will be, at least in religious education, Tower Club will be meeting. There may be other ministry teams that are taking advantage of the Sunday afternoon, but we're trying to balance the fact that it is Sunday, it is Sabbath, with a variety of meetings that they need to use that afternoon time. So that's kind of a large balcony picture looking as we go forth into the year. The 9 o'clock and the 11 o'clock will have an in-between time. And it is grounded in these values. So you just heard me talk about teacher training and deepening and supporting your work as spiritual directors. We're building on several years of work and moving further in the direction of saying, you know, after every class, wouldn't it be great if the teachers who were in the classroom could linger for even just 15 minutes to build a relationship as a teaching team, but also the practical manner of what happened in classroom today, how did it go? Are there particular concerns that we need to voice and email to the staff? How do we document and capture sort of the heart of what happened so that we can communicate that to the parents? So that what we're experiencing in church and home can be integrated. So we said this is so important that we're going to ask all the teaching teams to stay for 15 minutes. What does that mean, Katie? Okay, 9 o'clock, the rotation kids go to chapel, then they go downstairs for their classroom work, and then at 10:15, 75-minute mark, the rotations program concludes. 15 minutes, the teachers will linger to do their work of growing in their ministry. But they're also parents, so their kids and all the other kids need to have chaperones and need to be cared for. The other members on the rotation team who are signed up for that task of being chaperones on that Sunday will take the kids and go outside, weather permitting, and have playground time so that the kids can build relationship together. But these other chaperone teachers are not outside of religious education because we want to contain, because this is about familiarity of faces and building relationship. So let's have a robust team for the 9 o'clock green rotations team. And the team of maybe 6 teachers will work out internal to the team who's going to be teaching in the classroom, and then who will be the chaperones to be with the kids for about half an hour to 40 minutes or so, outside running around doing things. When the weather gets cold, doing something indoor-wise, activity. Plus the fact that some of the children will be part of the children's choir, and there's actually going to be a youth choir this coming year. So we're trying to make this in-between time, 9 and 11, in-between, an opportunity for religious education teachers to deepen in their practice, for the kids to build relationship and get to know one another. Even so much that we are going to send an invite to the 11 o'clock community. If you would like to, come a little earlier. We know that there's a battle that happens time-wise on Sunday mornings, I get that. But if you and your family would enjoy coming a little earlier to commingle with the 9 o'clock religious education community, great. And again, given COVID, we're going to gradually work up to this. We have heard over the years that the parish hall is not a very conducive place for families to get to know one another. There are families who really enjoy that, and the parish hall will be available for that. But let's experiment by having coffee centers in the lower level, and maybe in the 2nd floor level in Robin's parlor as well. So Ahmed and I got together and we were talking about the choreography of rooms. Foot room will be absolutely needed by the music ministry, but Ari now has Robin's parlor and the choir room. So we're still figuring out how to best utilize the spaces so that the sense of relational ministry can continue to deepen among us. I said a lot so far. I want to pause myself. Questions, what can I clarify? comments, questions are surfacing for you? Yes.
The only thing to consider is women's choir too, because a lot of, that's how women's choir kind of came about, is if their kids are in women's choir. So that's the only thing,
Yeah.
or women's ensemble.
So both those of you who will be in the role of a teacher, we're really asking you within your team to schedule that out. And if there are difficulties, then let the staff know, and we will try to make sure that all of those roles, and particularly paying attention to caring for the children, all of that will be covered so that you can be responsible to your other commitments on Sunday. Yes?
Katie, does that happen after the 11 o'clock?
Thank you for that. So after the 11 o'clock, we know that it's going to be slightly different because the big thing that we're going to be running into is lunch. Families need to go and have lunch. So 10 o'clock to 11:15, and then from 11:15 to 11:30, teachers doing their thing.
You're still on summertime, starting at 11.
Oh, 11 to 12:15, thank you for that. 12:15 to 12:30, that 15 minutes for the teachers to do their work. And then 12:30, maybe 12:45, at that point we're really allowing for the families to make the decision, but we'll have coverage should people want to linger. At any point, either at the 9 o'clock or at the 11 o'clock, families can choose not to linger if they have other birthday commitments and sports and things to go to. But we just want to make sure that that opportunity for relationship building is staffed. Does that help? There was a question.
I was gonna say, you're asking the kids to wait 15 minutes longer for donuts.
There's been significant conversation about donuts because Sugar Rush is no longer sadly in business. So Drew has been like hunting around for other donuts so that we can have donuts. So more on that to come. Yes.
Well, Sugar Rush is reopening soon.
They
They're
are.
Dale and Pontotono, and they just took half of the paper off their sign. They should be up in a few months.
Okay. I did not know that.
I can look out my window and see this,
Okay.
so this is important to know. But the other question then was, for junior high, so they're still doing chapel at 11?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Junior high, for those of you who know the junior high program, they will conclude with worship in Ames Chapel. Yes?
Can you confirm that kids choir is going to start right away, and will that be in person, will it be masked, or is it going to be virtual? Can you just speak about that briefly?
With the caveat that things are constantly changing.
Sure.
The last conversation I had with Kathleen was it is starting
And in person? Or?
in person. Yes?
I like the idea. I will say, from trying to remember back a year and a half ago, that time after the 9 a.m. RE is very chaotic.
Yeah.
And there's always been, in my experience, one or two kids whose parents don't come down for quite a while. And so I guess just trying to reinforce that for that to happen, parents do have to come and actually pick up their kids. Otherwise, that 15 to 30 minutes is kind of spent looking for those parents and waiting.
So for those who are in the classroom reflecting on what just happened, you will not have the attendance clipboard. It's the other teachers on your team who may be out on the House of Hope playground who will have the clipboard. And the parents will be instructed to go outside and sign back their children. Thanks for the clarification. Yeah.
I just want to say thank you for considering that, those aspects of it, because having started as a member here without children or a family, to becoming a member with a family and children, it was really jarring for me because those relationships altered because it felt very separate from, it's almost like two church communities, does that make sense? Yeah, so I just appreciate that you're thinking this through and like how everyone interacts.
You are not alone in saying that it feels like there are two church communities, because religious education is very involving. Okay, let me add more details, and if you have questions, feel free to interrupt me. For those of you with kids in our whole lives and coming of age, coming of age is now positioned at the 11 o'clock service. Okay? So Drew, with the mentors, the teachers, that will now be at the 11 o'clock You will remember that it used to be corresponding with the 4:30 service. It is now at 11 o'clock. Coming of age, however, will not start until October. For those of you who know, you've had children in Our Whole Lives, a sexuality, spirituality program. Given the online nature this past year, there were aspects of the Our curriculum that were, we did not have permission to do those things online. Or at best, it was sort of a gray area. And so what Drew and the team decided to do was to curtail the curricular content and save those curricular pieces that really work best in person for this coming fall. So what they're going to do is, because if you think about it, those OWL 8th graders are now 9th graders, which means that they're also coming of agers. They will utilize the month of September to do 3 intensives, as they're being called, like workshops, to cover those pieces of the curriculum that they were not able to do last year. So when you do the enrollment, you'll see this broken out. So pay attention and click on the right dot so that you know what you're signing up for. September will be typically for the 9th graders, beginning with those intensives for OWL. Not everybody will want to choose to do that, so that's an option. But if you do, that will be September, and then the formal start of coming of age will be in October. Any questions for those whom this is important information? Yes?
Are they still considering the overnight that'll be all transition into CUA?
Yes.
Yes.
COA, right now we're planning that COA will start with the retreat.
Yes.
So I know some businesses are accepting vaccination cards and it helps the community. Like as a member, I have one kid vaccinated, the other one can't, but I wonder if that's something like collectively we talk about too, that we're all gonna say, we're gonna give our information, or I don't know, and I don't know how the church conversation's been either. Like I know my workplace is trying to figure out, like, do we require this? How do we check it? But has there been any conversation about that, or are there any needs that you have for us as a community? And I know a lot of us have small children who we just don't have that option. So how do we protect each other's children? And that's just all.
So thank you for that. Before I wade into that category, are there other questions about the program, the structure, sort of the overall direction of how to do Sundays and Wednesdays? Because OWL will be returning to the regular Wednesday evenings, with the exception that I mentioned of those intensives for the 9th grade.
So the Wednesday going to be like the 7 to 8 or something?
Yeah, it'll be, I think at the beginning, we haven't finalized it, it'll be 7 to 8:30. If the food ministry returns at some point, it might even be 7:15 to 8:45. Those are the little details, but they become important. Yeah.
What do OWL kids usually do on Sunday mornings? They go to a class?
They go to junior high class.
Is Spirit Play gonna follow the same schedule as rotation?
Thank you for that question. So maybe that's a good bridge. As we look at COVID and church guidelines, Spirit Play resources are available online. And just a caveat, it's an important caveat, but Michelle is here and Sarah Clinton is here. You did a fabulous job of making those. Why I'm singling out Spirit Play, we know that given the character of our community, we know that when those who have access to vaccination, so I'm thinking about the 12-year-olds on up, anecdotally, and my intuition is that that's the preponderance of the choices that our families have made. The rotations and the elementary kids do not have access to that yet. We're looking at probably October, maybe November. The Spirit Play children are our youngest, excepting the nursery and childcare. So if practically what happens is that the enrollment data says that there are 2 families that are interested in Spirit Play, then we will likely have the video resources that are available, and it invites Spirit Play families to use that until we can safely be vaccinated and be back in church again. The rotations is itself a category because there's something about the moral authority of the church when schools, at least in the St. Paul public school system in Minneapolis, are returning, and we are inviting children and families to do their own risk management, right? But the overwhelming sort of discernment about the need for public schools opening, the overwhelming evidence is that, yes, we need to open the schools. And I would make a moral argument that faith formation and the work that we do is just as, and if I'm really arrogant, even more important than that. There is no entirely safe zone in this world. So as an executive team, we said that as clear as we can be in terms of our institutional boundaries, that will help our families to make their decisions in the best interest of their families. So, Michelle, I presume you likewise, but I've gotten a dozen emails from the RA community saying, help us to think about this, or we've pretty much made up our decision that we're really looking at the end of October, November. We'll see where the vaccination rates go with the Delta variant. So I fully anticipate that this will be a gradual return for the whole church, and especially so in religious education. Having said that, let me say a little bit more about where we are in terms of the church's institutional response and the preventative strategies. As much as we can for the sake of sort of moral equivalence, for the sake of clarity, we're paying attention to the SPPS, we're paying close attention to the Minnesota Department of Health, and close attention to the CDC, whatever your politics about how clear the messaging is has been about. For the time being, the aspiration still stands that the church will reopen for in-person ministry for Emerging of Waters on September the 12th. It's very likely that we will not ask the elementary kids and their families to be water pitchers. We might ask the junior high kids or the senior high kids to be water pitchers. So we're trying to be mindful of what are the best practices, even as we know that returning to in-person ministry and church is critically important for some people affected by pastoral care, and others who will have access to a pre-recorded, so it will not be live streamed. It's really become a question of capacity. If you were here in the sanctuary on Sunday, there's been a whole team up in the balcony working audio, visual, all of that. We will pre-record the 9 o'clock service, and then we will make it concurrently available at the 11 o'clock time. So it sort of feels like we're going to church at 11 o'clock. So that option will be there. We are also looking at the ventilation system. We've been attentive to this in the sanctuary and the large spaces, including this room. And we've had at least 3 outside professional organizations come in and take a look at our air handlers. We even thought at one point about investing tens of thousands of dollars into an ionization machine. The overall science about whether we move in that direction was not clear, but the people who do this work said, you know, Unity actually has a pretty good system of ventilation. The air handlers are actually quite good. And we can take a look at the filtration process, but they're actually quite good. And that was really an important vote of confidence. In the lower level, that same standard applies. And on top of that, we are looking at getting machines, air purifiers and ionizers for the nursery, for the hallway, for classrooms. So we are still very much in the process of that. Whatever the science of asking for a community that I want to argue among us is, mostly all of us are fully vaccinated now. I think the idea is important that we socially norm masking, and so we have agreed as an executive team that we're going to return to masking. And that's what I anticipate the SPPS will also say. For those of us who are teachers, and I spoke with teachers in the REMT, the 3 feet distance is really unrealistic. That guideline will probably still be there, but as to whether it's maintained strictly, most of the teachers I have talked to said that is an impossible ask. But whatever we learned, whatever the teachers learned in the school system learned from reopening, is that this is doable. And if we weigh the pros and cons, opening for in-person education is so vitally important that we're moving in that direction. And so too religious education. We are even thinking about designated access into the religious education space. So if you think about from the outside, you have the main entrance, you have the Ames chapel doors that can go directly into the junior high. This is where it becomes very nuanced, right? So if there were individuals who really wanted to severely curtail the exposure of their unvaccinated fourth grader to other adults in Unity Church, that access might be one way that we can accommodate that. With a caveat, of course, that parents will be in the sanctuary. So at some point, it really is about individual risk management. So that's another detailed consideration. What questions do you have? Yes?
Have you guys started thinking about what is the system going to be if, let's say, if they're in class and then one of them comes back positive for COVID, like how are we going to...
So the contact tracing and the quarantine protocols will again largely parallel the SDPS. They have yet to communicate those details out to their families, so we're anticipating that.
KP, I have a question about the nursery. For those smaller children that are too young to wear masks and obviously unvaccinated, when we open on the 12th, will the nursery be open? Is that a personal risk management decision? How's that going to go?
The nursery will be open, and I don't know if I said this to an earlier question. All the staff, that includes those who are working in the nursery staff, will be fully vaccinated. All of the volunteers who will be working in proximity to children will need to be fully vaccinated. So on the online enrollment form, we ask you to check that off. If the question was really about requiring proof of that, or mandating that, as a faith community, we have not got to that question. In fact, we have a lot of theological and ethical reasons that complicate that process. The language right now that I'm much more, not only comfortable with, but this is where I will lean into. This is a covenantal community, and we give our word. And when people check off the box and they said that they've been fully vaccinated, we take people's word of that. Do we police that by asking for proof of that? I'm actually not interested in whether people are faking the CDC cards. I'm actually more concerned about people who have been fully vaccinated but who have lost it or something and they don't know what to do with that and therefore they can't participate in things. As a faith community, there is reluctance to go into that level of policing. So for the time being, we're asking everyone who is enrolling their children, and if you're volunteering as a teacher, please let us know. Give us your word that you're fully vaccinated.
Given that we usually have an incentive to volunteer, and then we don't have to pay for our aid, and we don't really want to incentivize someone who's not vaccinated, not checking off the form, are there roles and options for people who aren't vaccinated, but they would still be able to fill the form with their own?
That's a great question, and I'm wondering if even Michelle, because there's a comment box, maybe we can tweak that and maybe even give greater visibility to that option. But we'll think about that. That's a great suggestion. There are actually many other ways that people can support religious education without directly engaging with children.
That's even something that you're just able to kind of mark on the forms that these are areas where we can have vaccination. Take care of the edge case.
Yes.
You might have said this, I apologize. Would there be an option for a parent to delay enrollment for their kids until they're able to be vaccinated?
Yeah, thank you for that. Michelle, do you want to speak to that?
What I would like people to do, if you know you're going to participate, whether immediately or later in the year, go ahead and fill out the enrollment form so that I know how many classes we need and how many volunteers we need. And then just let us know if you're going to start later so that we don't worry that you're not okay.
Okay, sounds
We want to be able to be as prepared as we can be and anticipate what the numbers might look like in spring semester.
sure.
Yes.
I should know the answer to this, but it's been a while since I mentored. Does mentoring preclude RE teaching at 11? Because you said that the COA is going to be meeting at 11 o'clock?
Given kind of the ask in terms of the actual Sunday, how many times during the year we want mentors to show up, mentoring doesn't count in terms of teaching in religious education. We generally ask like a semester's worth of teaching RE per family, and maybe at a future point, depending on what responsibility will be added to mentoring. So I hope I'm not discounting how important mentoring is, but we don't substitute teaching for those who choose to volunteer. Am I clear with that?
Yeah, so mentoring is primarily at a certain point, at certain times, you can still
You can be a teacher and be a mentor.
have to.
You'll have to work that out.
Conflict.
Yeah. Yep. Other questions?
With just a quick clarification because of what's happening for the new COA kids and that OWL kind of little bit, does that mean that the kids starting in OWL this year will not start also until October?
The whole new class of OWL, not affected by that, they will begin that first Wednesday, so like the 15th of September. They go back to the normal.
Okay, so that will still start at the, okay, thanks.
Other questions or comments? Yes.
Are we continuing Wellspring programming and will there be channels available?
So this is sort of tangentially related, but I think it's still a really helpful question. Wellspring Wednesday evening program, they've been pretty much scheduled out until December, so they will happen. Our classes will happen. Wellspring Wednesday worship service, that is now actually under the purview of religious education because we really want that to be increasingly intergenerational. So Drew and Ray, if you've been watching the videos, they're sort of anchoring Ames Chapel Wellspring Wednesday worship service. So much of the participation in Wellspring Wednesday is about food ministries, right? So given masking food, that becomes really, really difficult. So the hospitality team is still thinking through, but I think they're pretty close to making a decision that they're going to wait on the food ministry until that becomes safe for us to do. So what would that mean? That's why back to the 7 o'clock or 7:15, during the pandemic online, 7 o'clock made all the sense in the world as a start time. And that's likely what it's going to be. Once the food ministry returns, that means we'll start a little bit earlier and go up to Ames Chapel for worship service and then start the program at 7:15. So we'll migrate toward that model. But as far as Wednesday evening program, yes. Wellspring Wednesday worship service, yes. Food ministry, unlikely at this point. Okay. Good questions. Very detailed. Let me say one other huge thing that I don't even want to say is indirectly related. It is directly related to religious education. One of the permanent things of Unity Church going forward is our commitment to two edges that are sort of now embedded in the institution of this church. That as a faith community, we're going to lean further into what we're calling faith formation. I guess that's in my job title now, Minister of Faith Formation. So faith formation work, you will see more and more opportunities as well as an invitation for adult faith formation. So faith formation is one. And the other one, if you haven't guessed already, is anti-racist multicultural work. And these two things we are envisioning as like double helix. So one helix is faith formation, the other helix is anti-racist multicultural work. And we're saying there's no way that we can do faith formation in the world that we have right now without that faith formation attentive to and activated by anti-racist multicultural work. And we are not any social justice organization going about anti-racist multicultural work. We do that as a faith community. And so how we do anti-racist multicultural work will beg all sorts of questions about our spiritual practice and our liberal theology. On September 25th, many of you who have already attended Team Dynamics training sessions, you will be invited. And if you don't get an invitation, just email staff and then you'll be invited. You will be invited into a presentation on this double helix model of our ministry going forward. It's directly going to impact the resumption of curriculum review in the rotations program. We already did this with the junior high. And then it will work its way into the Spirit Play curriculum as well. And the religious education ministry team will be looking at how anti-racist, multicultural, spiritual practice work continues to deepen in how we envision religious education for children. So the teacher training opportunities, I didn't want to inundate you with too much information today, but when you receive invitation, many of those teacher training opportunities will be rooted in this double helix model as we go forward. I wanted you to know that, and I hope, as it does for me, it sort of trembles your heart with both fear and excitement. Questions, comments, I'm pretty much done. I have one more thing to say, but any questions about that? All right, the last thing is very practical. We will use the email address that you gave to us, and Michelle will email you an invitation to complete the online enrollment form. It's no surprise that the August gathering is our largest gathering. I fully anticipated that. We ask you to, as timely as you can, to complete the online enrollment. That allows us as staff to begin our work of organizing everything and ready for the start on September 19th. 12th is Emerging of Waters, and then the 19th is when the programs and the classes will actually take place. Those of you who are going to be teaching, please watch for a follow-up email with dates. We've already put it out there, but we will remind you of 2 teacher orientation dates, especially for anyone who has not done teaching. It is less of a teacher training, it's more of an orientation so that you kind of get that sense of what to do on a Sunday. There is a box that says your pledges are really appreciated, but if you need scholarship, please let us know by checking this box. I make it a point to say that every time. I'm going to lean into saying that even more strongly this year. The community has been incredibly supportive financially during this pandemic year. Barbara Pillardy, she was here, she would be bowing in gratitude to your financial commitment. And we also know that there have been many families who have struggled this year. We know that, and one of the gifts of a community is there's abundance collectively. So if there are financial difficulties, please don't hesitate to let us know and check out that box. We do not want that to hinder enrolling your children in religious education. Michelle and I will linger for any specific conversation. Many of you have been doing this for years and years, so if you're brand new, statistically, you can turn to your neighbor, they will have enough to get you fully orientated. But if I may, I'd love to close us with prayer. Holy One, the source of what truly matters, with all that encircles our minds and hearts and souls, we gather around that question of what truly matters. Help us as spiritual directors of our children. Help us as individuals who are on this journey of what truly matters. Help us as those who, like wrought iron, we find our values, our commitments being worked in ways that we have not experienced before. Help us to know that we are in community, that we discover the depth of what we are and what matters, never on our own, but in relational bonds where we risk difficult conversations together. May this language that is holy language, theological language, faith language, may it teach us that this is not mere opinion or personal beliefs, but that the ministry of the church has always been about naming realities that are real, but are difficult for us to see and hear, and difficult to sustain over time. At a time when the invisible realities like democracy and climate and ecological well-being are so fiercely contested, grant us the courage and the wisdom to step into the management of risk, that we might all the more courageously hazard what truly matters for us and for 7 generations to come. May it be so. Amen. Thank you, friends. This has been such a gift to be together.